What's going on? Welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how long you can stay in a calorie deficit. It very much does depend on the individual, your goals, and your starting point. So I'm going to walk you through everything you need to know so you can figure out how long you need to stay in a calorie deficit. Let's get into it.
So Jordan, has being on a cut affected your jiu-jitsu training at all?
My jiu-jitsu's felt better than ever, to be honest. Because it's such a slow, sustainable cut, hunger is there, but I feel amazing. And that's the benefit of not going too drastic. When you go too drastic and cut everything out, you're super exhausted and you're wicked hungry and food is all you can think about. But when it's slow and sustainable, it's not easy, but it's much easier. And so I feel great. Just finished training, fucking exhausted. Gonna go get some food. Wanna say hi? Wanna say hi to YouTube? Okay, so the major question that we're answering today is how long can you stay in a calorie deficit? But, hi. This question is predicated on another question, which is it possible to stay in a calorie deficit for too long? I know, that's right. Is it possible to stay in a calorie deficit for too long? So let's talk about that first, and then let's go from there. All right, so I had to put my daughter down for a nap, but you and I are still gonna talk about, number one, is it possible to stay in a calorie deficit for too long? And the short answer is yes, it is absolutely possible to stay in a calorie deficit for too long. I don't know anybody who would argue that, but it's not a very black and white answer. It's not as simple as, well, it's 2 months or it's 6 months or it's 1 year. And a lot of people, especially on social media, like to make it seem it's as simple as this is right, this is wrong. 6 months is too long, 3 months is okay. It's not as simple as that. It's much more nuanced. And there are what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, 5 major things that I think it really depends on. So as I do in a lot of my videos, I have some blank spaces here, some fill in the blanks to make sure you watch the whole video. Do not skip around, because I'm gonna explain each of these things that it really depends on so you can know for you how long you can stay in a calorie deficit, or at least have a better idea so you can feel confident going into your diet, confident going into your weight loss phase, knowing you're not gonna damage your metabolism, you're not gonna ruin yourself, you're not gonna set yourself up for failure. So you have a much better idea of how long you can stay in a calorie deficit while still making progress and not ruining your body. With all that being said, the first thing that it depends on is how much body fat you're starting with. So if you're starting with a lot of extra body fat, I'm gonna explain this in 1 second. If you're starting with a very high percentage of body fat, you can be in a calorie deficit for a very, very long time. I've had many clients who are starting off with very, very high levels of body fat who stayed in a calorie deficit for many months, if not a couple of years, because they were starting off with such a high level of body fat. On the other hand, if you're starting off with a very low level of body fat, take me for example, I'm doing this mini cut right now. I'm by no means shredded, but I have a relatively low body fat percentage. The amount of time I'm gonna be able to spend in a calorie deficit is inherently shorter than someone who has a much higher body fat percentage because I have less to lose. Now, the next question people always ask is, well, how do I know exactly what percent body fat I should be and how long I should be in a dieting phase for? For example, if I'm 32% body fat, does that mean that I should be in a dieting phase for 6 months and 3 weeks? It's not that simple. There are other things it depends on as well, but what you really need to understand is that the higher your body fat, the longer you can be in a calorie deficit. The lower your body fat, the more brief your calorie deficit is going to have to be to make sure that you're safe and healthy along the way, and also to make sure that you're doing something sustainable. So let's say, for example, you're starting out at 40% body fat, which is a very high body fat percentage to start off with. You might be able to look ahead and say, I could stay in a calorie deficit for 2 years if it's a more slow, sustainable, steady approach. But as you go from 40 to 30 to 20, the amount of time that you have left in this calorie deficit is going to be shorter and shorter and shorter. So the higher body fat you have, the longer amount of time you can spend in a calorie deficit. The lower body fat you have, the less amount of time you can spend in a calorie deficit. Now, the next thing it depends on is how steep your calorie deficit is. All right, so for example, if you're doing more of a rapid fat loss approach, which is not inherently bad, there are times and places in which a very severe calorie deficit, doing a very, very big drop in calories is warranted. If you're doing that, the amount of time you can be in a calorie deficit is inherently shorter because you can't sustain that for a longer period of time. But on the other hand, look at something that I'm doing right now, right? I'm in the middle of my mini cut. I'm about 8 pounds down in just about 4 weeks, right? I can do this for a little bit longer period of time because it's not as severe, it's not as strict, it's not as steep of a calorie deficit. So the more you drop your calories from the very beginning, the less amount of time you're gonna be able to sustain that. But the more sustainable approach you have, the less severe your deficit, the longer you can do it without worrying about damaging your body or metabolism or your relationship with food. Now, going off of that, the next question is, well, how do you know what your calorie deficit should be? How severe should your calorie deficit actually be? Well, number one, if you haven't seen, I have a free calorie calculator you can use. I'll put the link in the description of this video so you can use it. It's another video here on YouTube to tell you what I think is probably gonna be the most sustainable calorie deficit. But keep in mind, there are many approaches. Some people do better with a rapid fat loss approach. Some people do better with a more slow, steady, sustainable approach. Generally speaking, if you have a very high body fat, it does make sense to start with a little bit more of a severe, steep deficit, just so you lose weight a little bit more quickly and then transfer into something a little bit more sustainable. If you're starting off with a lower body fat like me, it usually makes sense to do more of a slow, steady approach because as you reduce calories, you're more likely to lose muscle mass. And the leaner you are, the more likely you are to lose muscle mass. And that's the last thing you want to do. So generally speaking, the higher body fat you have, you can stay longer in a calorie deficit and you can be a little bit more severe with it. The lower body fat you have, the shorter amount of time you can be in a calorie deficit and the more slow, steady, and sustainable it should be, the less severe your deficit should be. So again, link in the description if you want my calorie calculator to help you figure out how many calories you should be eating to help you lose fat. So the next point, this is one of the biggest ones, if not the absolute biggest one. What it really depends on, most of all, is how consistent you're actually being in a calorie deficit. Because here's the deal. We all know people, maybe you're this person who says, I've been dieting for years. I've been in a calorie deficit for years and I'm not losing weight. Well, then frankly, you're not in a calorie deficit, because if you were in a calorie deficit for years, you would be fucking tiny. You'd be minuscule. You probably wouldn't be alive, right? If you were in a calorie deficit for years and years and years on end, like you would starve to death. By definition, that's what would happen, okay? So the reality is this, many people are in a calorie deficit mindset, but they're not actually in a calorie deficit. They're always thinking about trying to lose weight. They're always thinking about dieting. And when they do go into these dieting phases, they often severely restrict their calories. They don't allow any of their favorite foods or treats, and they're super rigid, super strict, not flexible at all. So maybe they're super strict for 3, 4, 5 days. Maybe they're super strict for 3, 4, 5 weeks, whatever it is. But eventually it becomes too much, too strict, and they go off track. And they binge, maybe it takes a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months, whatever it is, they go off track. And then they undo everything they just did, and this is the yo-yo cycle they fall into. But just because they have this yo-yo cycle doesn't mean they're not constantly thinking about losing weight and constantly wanting to be in a calorie deficit. And these are the people who struggle the most, because you're all the time thinking about calorie deficit, calorie deficit, calorie deficit, but you're being so strict that you're never actually allowing yourself time to be in it for a long, consistent, sustainable amount of time. So this is what you have to really, really question about yourself and about how you're approaching weight loss. Are you consistently being in a calorie deficit for a month, 2 months, 3 months, or are you being super strict for a week and then binging for a month after that, right? I would much rather have a slower, steadier, consistent approach over 3 months than try and lose it super fast in a week or 2 weeks and then binge and regain everything and then more. So this is what's really important. This is actually why in the Inner Circle app, we have a consistency counter. I'll put up some pictures and videos up right now so you can see what it looks like. The consistency counter will show you a percentage of how consistent you've been throughout the month. So for example, let's say a month is 31 days. If you've been consistent for 24 to 26 of those days, that makes you about 80% consistent. Most people, when they start tracking their consistency, they find they're only about like 40 to 50% consistent throughout the month. They don't realize that the weekends are about 40% of your entire week. So in their mind, Monday through Thursday, they're super, super strict. Then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it goes to shit. And like, well, why isn't this working? It's because you're not being consistent. You're missing out on almost half, if not more than half, of the consistency throughout the entire month. So the reality is this: a lot of people talk about how you shouldn't be in a calorie deficit for a super long period of time, and I generally agree, but the fact of the matter is most people are not in a calorie deficit for that long, and definitely not for too long, because they try and overdo it with severeness and strictness, so that maybe they're in it for a very short period of time, and they binge and go off track and yo-yo and regain everything. So it's not that being in a calorie deficit is the issue. It's that your approach to being in a calorie deficit is too strict, too severe, and you're not consistent with it long enough. So try to be more flexible with it, rein it in, and just be more consistent. Enjoy your favorite foods on a regular basis, be in a calorie deficit for a long period of time or a longer period of time than you've been, and you'll start seeing results. Okay, so we got 2 points left, 5 and 6. I think 6 is one of the most overlooked and most important ones, so keep watching, watch the whole way through. But going to 5 first. It depends on whether or not you're using refeeds and or diet breaks. Okay, now I've spoken about refeeds and how I use them in a previous video, so I'm gonna put the link in the description if you haven't seen that yet. But here's the deal. When a lot of people talk about how long you can be in a calorie deficit for, they're often imagining that you're in a calorie deficit every single day. And you can do that approach. You can be in a calorie deficit every single day, but the reality is that's really fucking difficult, especially if you're doing it even just for a month. Like, being in a calorie deficit every single day for a month is not easy, because look at the weekends, look at vacations, look at parties, look at social events, look at things at work. Some days it's not feasible to be in a calorie deficit without just completely throwing off your entire schedule, not to mention your mental and emotional health, right? So for me, I don't like the idea of being 100% consistent. 100% consistency isn't perfect, it's prison. I want you to be closer to 80 to 85% consistent, because that's gonna allow you to see progress while still enjoying your favorite foods. So going back to the refeeds and diet breaks, sometimes it makes sense. So if we're looking at, let's say, a 6-month calorie deficit, within those 6 months, you have either days or maybe a week or 2 weeks of time frames where you take a diet break. You increase your calories to out of a calorie deficit. This is super helpful. I literally just did this the other day. So when I do a refeed, it's just a single day. It's where maybe I start to feel myself getting a little bit more hungry, start to feel myself getting a little bit more tired. And so what I want to do is I deliberately eat more calories. I take myself out of a calorie deficit that one day, so that then I can go back into a calorie deficit for the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks without a problem. And so having these little days or even weeks where you just take yourself out of a calorie deficit, put yourself in maintenance or maybe even a slight surplus, gives you a nice diet break. It gives you not only a physiological break, but a mental and emotional break as well. Because how many times can you really say, like, no, I'm not gonna go out to dinner, no, I'm not gonna do this, I'm gonna avoid this event. You can't do that forever and expect to live and enjoy a great life. We need to find that balance. So there are 2 different ways that I approach this. Refeeds, which I generally look at as a single day, where you just have one day, maybe you're getting a little bit more tired, a little bit more hungry, maybe you notice your libido is going down, your concentration is down. Take that day, say, fuck it, I'm just gonna eat more today. I generally like to focus more on carbohydrates because that has a better effect on leptin. It's gonna spike your leptin, it's gonna help reduce hunger, increase energy, all of that stuff. But this is a really good approach to just give yourself a day, a nice break. Another approach is a more longer term diet break, where maybe you take 2 days, 3 days, or a whole week or 2 weeks where you increase your calories back up to maintenance. Now, with a refeed day, I don't personally track my calories because it's only one day. I'm not using it as an excuse to binge. I eat until I'm full, but it's just one day. No one ever got crazy jacked or made incredible progress from one day of perfect eating. You're not gonna ruin all your progress from one day of not perfect eating, right? So that's how I look at the refeed days. For a diet break where it's a week, 2 weeks or more, I do think it's important to track your calories because it's a longer period of time. So for a diet break, what you might do is maybe you'll have 3 weeks on point in a calorie deficit, and then 1 week where you take a diet break. You bring back up to maintenance. So this would really look like a staircase approach where you go down, maintain, down, maintain, down, maintain. And it's not as quick or as fast as just being in a calorie deficit straight for 3 months. But when you're in a calorie deficit straight for 3 months, it's so taxing mentally, physically, and emotionally. So when you have these mini diet breaks where you can maintain for a little bit, you give yourself the opportunity to relax, to enjoy, have fun, go out, and this gives you more flexibility within your nutrition. So having looked at this and understanding if you're using refeeds and or diet breaks, the amount of time that you can be in a calorie deficit is gonna be extended. It's gonna be a much longer period of time because you're inherently not gonna go as fast, but it allows you to do this with more flexibility. So if you're not using refeeds or diet breaks, the amount of time that you can be in a calorie deficit is much shorter because you're not giving yourself that flexibility. It's gonna be very difficult mentally and emotionally. But if you are using refeeds and diet breaks, you can do it for a much longer period of time without worrying about it negatively affecting your metabolism, your physiology, your psychology, your emotion, all of that. So it does depend. And for me personally, I prefer to have regular refeeds and diet breaks just because it makes it more enjoyable and far more sustainable. As for number 6, the last one, like I said, I think this might be the most important one because what it really depends on is your current relationship with food. And I saved this one for last because I really want to hammer this home, and I hope you're paying attention. Because here's the deal, if you have a very poor relationship with food, maybe you're struggling with binge eating, maybe you're struggling with anorexia, bulimia, maybe you're just struggling with food in general, it's taking up so much of your mind, it's taking up so much of your day, it's probably not a good idea to be in a calorie deficit at all. Definitely not deliberately trying to count your calories meticulously, because if you have a very poor relationship with food, the more you try and focus on putting yourself in a calorie deficit, the more you're gonna perpetuate a bad relationship with food. I've said this for many, many years. Any progress that you make built on a foundation of an unhealthy relationship with food is inherently going to be short-lived. You cannot make long-term progress, physical progress with food if you do not first have a healthy relationship with it. Now, we can try and improve both at the same time, but from my experience, the vast majority of people first need to work on improving their relationship with food and then moving on to understanding energy balance, calorie deficit, changing their body composition. I'm not saying you can't do both at the same time, you can, but most people need to take a more staggered, methodical approach to it. First your relationship, then you go to a calorie deficit. So if you're struggling with binge eating, or if you're struggling with bulimia or anorexia, number one, please see a therapist about it. Seek out professional help. There are people out there who can help you with that. And number two is I would not try and go to a calorie deficit at all. Like not even for a day, because that can really be a trigger for you and perpetuate those issues. On the other hand, if you generally have a good relationship with food, you're not struggling with binge eating or anorexia or bulimia or anything like that, all of this applies. And you can really decide how long you want to be in a calorie deficit, how severe your calorie deficit is going to be, if you're going to use refeeds or not. You can decide all of this on your own. And then from there you can figure out, okay, am I going to be in a calorie deficit for 3 months or 6 months or a year, depending on how much body fat you're starting with, all of this. All of these factors come into play, and now you can start to see how nuanced it is. But you can decide for yourself. Are you going to be in a calorie deficit super, super strict for a month? Are you going to be in a more slow, sustainable deficit for 3 months? Are you going to do something for longer, like 8 months, 10 months, a year, depending on your body fat? It's entirely up to you. Now, I will say, for some people, a faster, more strict approach is better. Generally, those people have a higher body fat percentage. They have a lot of weight to lose, and they need to lose weight quickly to improve their health dramatically and very, very fast. If you're starting off with a lower body fat percentage, usually a very fast approach is not in your best interest. You're more likely to lose muscle mass, and you're more likely to develop an unhealthy relationship with food, because the lower your body fat, the lower your calories are going to have to be. And so if you reduce them too much, that's when you can really screw yourself mentally and emotionally in your relationship with food. So coming full circle, if you've got a bad relationship with food, please seek out help. Do not go into a calorie deficit just yet. Just wait to build that healthier relationship. In fact, maybe if you want me to do a video with some of my top ideas on how to improve your relationship with food, please leave a comment about how you might be able to help improve your relationship with food so you can get to a point where you can then go into a calorie deficit. I don't know if that'd be something you want, so if it is, leave a comment and let me know. But please, if you're struggling with that, build a healthy relationship with food first, then go into a calorie deficit. But if you already have a relatively healthy relationship with food, follow the rest of these guidelines and you're gonna be good to go. So with all that out of the way, a little update on my mini cut. I'm a little over 4 weeks in right now. I weighed in at 155.2 today, so I'm about 8 pounds down from the starting point. And I feel really good. I mean, you saw me going crazy in jiu-jitsu today. My endurance is feeling good. My conditioning is feeling good. My strength is feeling good. Hunger is minimal. It's there. I do feel hungry sometimes, but it's not starving. I think this is an important thing to be aware of. Hunger is normal. Hunger isn't an emergency. When you're in a calorie deficit, you're going to get hungrier, and that's okay. Learning to be comfortable with hunger, I think, is an important skill. But I'm not starving. If you start to be starving, either your calorie deficit is too severe or you're eating like shit, right? You have to increase the quality of your foods, have more nutrient dense, lower calorie, often high fiber, nutrient rich foods as opposed to calorie dense options, okay? Other than that, everything feels great. It's slow and steady. It's really not slow. It's like pretty moderate to fast, but very, very steady, and I feel great. So that's the update, and I'll give you more as time goes on. All right, so I'm gonna make some changes to today's workout. It's a standard full body workout, starting with strength in the beginning, and then after the strength, getting a little bit more into conditioning stuff. My coach, Alex, actually prescribed strength and conditioning, some sprint work after, but because jiu-jitsu was so long and very, very intense this morning, I'm gonna skip the cardio today. I'm not feeling it, and I don't wanna stress my body too much. So I'm only gonna do the strength work, again, starting off with the heavy, heavy strength work at the beginning, and then going into the more conditioning-based strength work at the end. All right, let's get into it.
What's going on with that exercise? You don't seem to like that very much.
I hate it. It's so beneficial. It's super important, not just for sports performance, but for health, for hip stability, for knee stability, for just back pain, for knee pain, for overall joint health, and for your preserving your joints and your overall performance. It's one of the best exercises you can do. My coach Alex prescribed it in a way that we do a 2-second descent and a 4-second ascent. So it's a very slow, controlled movement. And my quads are burning like crazy. That's my least favorite feeling in all of strength training, is the quad burn, which is probably why I've got tiny bitch ass quads. I've got these super small, skinny quads because I hate that feeling. So. Yeah, so we're doing a circuit. So we got 3 kettlebell snatches per arm. Then I'm gonna do 4 dumbbell power cleans, 2 dumbbell front squats, 2 dumbbell push presses, and then 2 dumbbell front squats, then 4 dumbbell power cleans, and then 3 kettlebell snatches per side. So it's like a ladder going down and then going back up the ladder, and I'm gonna repeat this whole thing 3 times.
Feel pretty good?
Feel very good now that it's done. I'm glad I am not doing the conditioning portion today as well, because it would be awful, so I'm just pushing that to tomorrow, but feel very good, now ready to relax and eat. All right, now we're gonna answer 2 Instagram questions from my Instagram Q&A, but first, gonna give away 3 free months in the inner circle. So what I want you to do right now is leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and like the video, and make sure in your comment you just tell me what you think of the video thus far. If you hate it, be nice about it, but you can tell me you hate it. And if you love it, tell me what you like about it. Tell me if you've learned anything thus far. Anyway, let's get into the Instagram Q&A. So question number 1 is from Miga.iowana6, and she wrote, what is the correct elbow plank position? This is a really, really good question because most people royally fuck up the plank. Now, I'm a huge fan of planks for many, many, many reasons, and maybe we can do a separate discussion on that in a different video. But the plank is a tremendous core exercise if you're doing it properly. And so much of whether or not you're doing it properly depends on your elbow position, specifically in relation to your shoulders. Now, most people screw this up from the perspective of they keep their elbows way too far down, almost towards their waist, right? Towards their belly button, towards their hips. Your elbows should not be that far down. You should not have an acute angle at your elbow. You want your elbows directly beneath your shoulder. From here, when it's directly beneath your shoulder, you're gonna have a 90-degree angle in your arm from your elbow. It's a complete 90-degree angle. What this does is it increases the lever arm, so it makes it far more difficult, and you have to use your abs much more effectively in order to stabilize. You have to remember, the whole point of a plank is something called anti-extension. You do not want your lower back to be arching. You want to allow your core to work to stabilize your spine in a neutral position. If your elbows are too far down, then you can just rest on your upper arm and not have your abs do the work properly. This is why people say they can do a plank for 5 minutes, because they're not actually working their abs, they're just passively resting on their upper arm. But when you bring the elbow up, you can't rest on your arm anymore. You have to use your abs and your core to stabilize properly. Now, if you want, you can make it even harder by bringing your elbow even further up and increasing the lever arm even more. This is significantly more difficult. This is actually when it starts to look more like an ab rollout, right? Because when you do an ab rollout, you have a much longer lever arm, and now it's dynamic and far more difficult. But basically, and generally speaking, the further your elbow is away from your hip, the longer the lever arm, the harder your core is gonna have to work in order to stabilize. So at the very, very least, make sure that your elbow is directly beneath your shoulder the entire time. If it's much easier for you, then feel free to take it even further up. But the bare minimum, directly beneath your shoulder, 90-degree angle at your arm. Okay, second question from Michael109, and they asked, do women lose fat slower than men, especially in a calorie deficit? So there's a couple things I want to touch on. Number 1 is the only way to lose fat is to be in a calorie deficit. So don't even need the second part of especially in a calorie deficit, because the only way a man or woman is going to lose fat is to be in a calorie deficit. The main question is, do women lose fat slower than men? This is a very, very common question. And the answer, simply in terms of men versus women, let's say we have a man and a woman, same exact weight, same exact body composition in terms of total fat, total muscle, all of that. Just because one is a man and one is a woman doesn't mean one of them is going to lose fat faster. It's not based on biological sex, it's based on your weight and your body composition. Now, with that said, generally speaking, men tend to be bigger and have more muscle mass than women. Women tend to be smaller and have a higher body fat percentage than men. So with that in mind, yes, generally speaking, women will lose fat slower than men because they are smaller, they can't eat as many calories, and they have a higher body fat starting point, and not to mention, they need more body fat in order to serve their biological functions of what they need based on just on their simple biology. Men don't need as high of a body fat percentage, so often we can lose it a little bit more easily. But important to keep in mind, this isn't just based on your biology. It's not just based on men inherently lose weight faster than women. It's not how it works. If we're looking at weight trends over time, what we'll often see is, in fact, if you've been keeping up with my mini cut right now, you'll see my weight fluctuates a lot, up and down, multiple pounds every day. And one of the most common messages I get from women are women saying, I had no idea that men's weight fluctuates just as much as ours does. The difference is Women's fluctuations are often a bit more predictable based on your menstrual cycle, and not only more predictable, but also more severe. So oftentimes it's not uncommon for me to have a woman client have their weight fluctuate upwards of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pounds every single month throughout their menstrual cycle, right around the same time. And as that happens, often hunger will increase and a whole host of other things that come along during your menstrual cycle. So I do think it is harder for women to lose fat than it is for men. I think it's more difficult, especially due to your menstrual cycle. Cravings increase, often energy will go down, it's super uncomfortable, like depending on how your cycle impacts you. I do think that it is harder for women than it is for men, without question. But let's say you have a man and a woman, same weight, same body composition, in an equal caloric deficit, they're gonna lose fat at the same rate. The question is, can they both stay as consistent? And usually what I've found is, for most women, not all, but most, it makes sense when they're going through their period, oftentimes to increase calories, bring it back up to a more maintenance so that they have more energy, they feel better. So this way, they have a more of like a diet break for that whole week so they can relax a little bit. So it's gonna be a little bit slower when you follow this approach, but more sustainable for them. So for me, it's not that based on their sex, they're gonna lose weight faster or more slow. It's more that your weight is gonna fluctuate more severely during your menstrual cycle, and because of what you're going through, it actually makes the process more difficult. But this is the distinction to make. It's not like men inherently lose weight faster than women. It's that men will often have an easier time. It's not as difficult. And your weight fluctuations as a woman are probably more predictable, but also more severe. So you have to keep that in mind. And again, that's why, we'll see in my Inner Circle app, I have this weight tracking app that you can see the trend over time and you can watch it. In this way, you can predict, oh, I know my weight is gonna spike up this time every single month. I know generally about how much my weight is gonna spike up every month, so that you're not surprised by it, you're not upset by it, it doesn't bother you, and you can continue to stay consistent. Because again, the most important factor is, how long can you stay consistent with it? If you're doing something that doesn't allow you to be consistent, it's not gonna work long term. So do men inherently lose weight faster than women? No. I think men do have an easier time with it. Just unfortunately, we have an easier time based on not having to go through a menstrual cycle. But as long as you're consistent and you find what works for you, you will continue to lose weight and it will work. I promise you, just gotta stay with it. All right, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you don't already. And really quick, I just wanna leave a quick message. If you're in a dieting phase right now, or you're thinking about starting a dieting phase, find what works best for you and just be consistent, okay? This isn't a one night quick fix. This isn't something that's gonna happen in a single day or even a week or a month. It takes time. And a lot of people have been saying like, oh, you always talk about find what works best for you, but how do I find what works best for me? It's trial and error. You're not gonna find what works best for you often the first time or the second time or even the third time. I've been doing this for many, many years. I've worked with thousands of clients and I've done a lot of experiments on myself and with other people. So you have to remember, you have to be willing to try something and fail at it and get up and try again. This is how this works. That's why we have to remember there's no finish line. There's no end date by which all of your goals are achieved. This is a forever thing. This is for your whole life. So don't try and make all of the progress as quickly as possible. Look at this as an experiment, as a test. You're trying to have fun and also improve yourself along the way, all right? The only way to fail is if you give up altogether. So keep going. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. And again, I'm giving away 3 free months in the Inner Circle. So leave a comment, tell me what you think of the video, and you'll be immediately entered to win a free month in the Inner Circle, which I will announce the winners in the next YouTube video. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon.